So good afternoon, everyone. Well, thank you all for joining us today. So in today's webinar, we are inviting our speakers from the Hong Kong Trade Development Council and the Singapore Economic Development Board to give updates on their respective economic center. Our speaker is also going to share existing incentives and resources to local companies who are interested in international expansion to Asia. This webinar will be recorded. At the end of the presentation, we will also leave some time for Q&A. So if you have any questions, please feel free to leave your questions in the Q&A box below. We would also like to recognize this webinar is in partnership with the City of Austin's Economic Development Department. And we would also like to thank all our corporate partners for their support. This event is also sponsored by Laowai Enterprises. We have Tyler Johnson here joining us today, who is the founder and also the author of The Way of the Laowai book. So I would like to turn it over to Tyler for him to say a few words. Welcome, Tyler.
Great, thank you. I was just looking at this picture here. It looks like I had a little bit more hair on the top of my head. I don't know if it's changed at all. So thank you. I want to thank the Chamber, Marina, Asean, and everybody there for allowing me to be a sponsor here. It's in my interest and background based on the time that I spent in Asia that I continue to try to spread the word and help people understand what Asia is all about, whether it's China or Singapore or various different cultures and stuff. And so as a result of my experience across Asia over a decade, I wrote a book on it. And the intent was to write a book to help people navigate some of the lessons that I learned throughout my time in Asia. And the hope was to provide some of this input to businesses and companies and organizations that wanted to expand into Asia or that were learning different cultures and stuff. And so I would appreciate, if you check it out on Amazon and check out some of the lessons that are there. I would love that, and I appreciate the time. And thank you for the time here. I'm looking forward to Jeff and Winchell's time and what they have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Tyler. Thank you so much for your support and sponsor this event. So next up, I would like to hand it over to Marina for her to introduce today's speakers. Thank you, Marina.
Thanks, Asean. For those of you who don't know, I'm the outgoing CEO. Our new CEO, Fang Fang, has a conflict and wasn't able to be with us today. So you guys got me for one last webinar. Tyler has been a really wonderful member, and he has volunteered on a couple of our committees. So thank you, Tyler, for supporting this event. Well, we're really excited for this briefing. It is Global Entrepreneurship Week, which is very different this year, given that none of us is traveling. But we planned it and we're moving forward with it. We think that companies who prepare and look to the future will be well placed when COVID goes away and we can go back to a different kind of normal. That is going to happen. It's just a matter of when. I'm really excited to have Winchell Cheung and Jeff Chia. Both of them have been partners with the Chamber. We are the resource for connecting to Asia. So we have partners all over Asia with the different trade organizations. So if you have any questions or need a connection, feel free to reach out to the Chamber. But we're going to start off with Winchell Cheung. He's the Director for Midwest Americas with the Hong Kong Trade Development Council. And then Jeff will give us a little update on what's happening in that powerhouse of Singapore. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Winchell.
Okay, thanks, Marina. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I'd like to wish all of you well and good health. I'd like to thank the Marina, Greater Austin Asian Chamber of Commerce, Tyler, for inviting me to this webinar. It is indeed a great honor to be part of this event. Now, in the next 10-15 minutes, I'm going to give you an update on Hong Kong. I'll also talk about business opportunities in some region adjacent to Hong Kong. Now, as we all know, the global business environment is increasingly challenging. And with surging COVID cases in many parts of the world, especially in the US and in Europe, the outlook is very uncertain. Nevertheless, we may finally see the light at the end of the tunnel, as multiple vaccines will likely become available soon. Now, despite all the uncertainties, I believe there are solid opportunities in some emerging markets in Asia. Now, before I get into these emerging markets, I'd like to first update you on Hong Kong. As some of you may know, Hong Kong has been handed a triple whammy since last year. First, the US-China conflict. Hong Kong was kind of stuck in the middle. Then the large-scale protests turned violence to a certain extent. And on top of all that, COVID. Now, these unprecedented events really created tremendous challenges for Hong Kong. Nevertheless, Hong Kong economy saw some improvement in the third quarter. Thanks to an improved external trading environment amid the accelerated growth of mainland China's economy and stronger financial market activities. Our GDP registered a year-on-year decline of 3.5% in the third quarter, but visibly smaller than a 9% contraction in the second quarter. Now, our export resumed moderate growth of around 3.9% in the third quarter. Now, our retail sales have been hard hit. Went down almost 13% over the same month in 2019. Our unemployment rate reached to 6.4% in September, the highest in 16 years. So the COVID situation is still not fully under control at this point, although we are doing better than some other countries. Our economy relies on free trade, and it is the largest free trade areas in the world. We don't have any import tariff. Now, any free trade deal around the world can benefit Hong Kong directly or indirectly. And that's why we welcome the so-called Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership just signed in Vietnam a few days ago. So, after 8 years of negotiation, now this free trade deal is the largest in the world, representing 1/3 of global population and also 1/3 of global GDP. The members include China, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, plus the 10-country Asean trade bloc. Now, this new trade deal is expected to further bolster trade and investment, and as well as overall business activities between these 15 countries in the region. Now, I see this is also a good opportunities for US company to take advantage of this development. Now, another Asian region I like to spend more time on is the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. Now, I'm sure Jeff will elaborate on that later on. Now, as I mentioned earlier, it is a trade bloc of 10 nations in Southeast Asia. Although Hong Kong is not a member, it is very much part of it in terms of location and business relations. Now, the ASEAN region was doing quite well in recent years before COVID. Now, its economy grew by about 4.5% last year, but of course, it's expected to contract about 4% this year for obvious reasons. Now, with a population of 650 million people and a GDP of 3 trillion, it is the 5th largest economy in the world if it was a country. Now, you can imagine this is a huge consumer market, very much like China, with growing household income and increasing appetite for imported goods and services, as well as technologies. Now, Hong Kong and ASEAN are quite integrated, both economically and culturally. Now, our business relationship, with the region really began centuries ago. Many of the businesses there were originated from Hong Kong, and Hong Kong has been one of the top investors. It is important to note that Hong Kong and ASEAN concluded a free trade agreement and also an investment agreement last year. So Hong Kong offers US company an ideal entry point to tap into the ASEAN market and at the same time, the China market. Now, talking about China market, I like to focus on one specific area of China. It is called the Guangdong, Hong Kong, Macau, Greater Bay Area. Now, the development of this Bay Area is one of China's key strategic planning initiatives to integrate the 2 special administrative regions, that is Hong Kong and Macau, and the 9 cities in the Guangdong province. By the end of 2019, the total population in this Greater Bay Area was over 72 million, with the GDP of 1.68 trillion. Now, the GDP of the Guangdong province, the largest province in China, grew by 6.3% in 2019. Now, to put all this number into perspective, the population in the Greater Bay Area is bigger than the UK or Italy. The land area is bigger than Ireland, and the GDP would rank 11th in the world, ahead of Russia, South Korea, Spain, and Australia. Now, Hong Kong was the very first and largest investor in the region, date back in the late 70s and early 80s. At that time, the region was called the Pearl River Delta. Okay. Now, almost all of the Hong Kong manufacturers has already moved or relocated to that area. For decades, Hong Kong has built up a lot of expertise and experience in the area. And with this new Greater Bay Area initiative, we are seeing more and more Hong Kong and overseas company become increasingly active there. Now, Hong Kong is well connected in the region through bridges and rail links. Some of you might have already taken the new 34-mile Hong Kong-Zhuhai-Macau bridge. In fact, China has recently announced that it would invest another 68 billion to further improve rail connection, building nearly 500 miles of intercity railway and 5 transport hubs in the area. Per capita GDP in the area is over 23,000 per capita, the highest in China. And with a population of over 72 million, it is indeed a very attractive market for anything imported, consumer goods, services, industrial product, what have you. Now, overall industrial activities and retail sales in China have rebounded in the 3rd quarter. In October alone, export to the US, interesting, export to the US were up 21%. Okay, year on year. And auto sales in China went up 8% in October. Now we are seeing strong growth in many areas, including luxury goods, cosmetics, food and beverages, electronics, and household appliances. In fact, Bain just released a report indicating that China will be the largest luxury market in the world by 2025 and expect a 45% growth this year. So Hong Kong, as you know, with the one country, two system, it offers US companies a very viable platform to take advantage of all these new developments. Now, I have given you some very concise updates about Hong Kong, the Greater Bay Area, and ASEAN. And then you might then ask, as a small, medium-sized company interested in the region, what is my next step? Well, Hong Kong is very much in the heart of all these developments, with decades of experience doing business in the entire region. Also, a big part of our work at the Hong Kong Trade Development Council is to help you find potential partners in Hong Kong or other parts of Asia who can help you tap these markets opportunities. Now, of course, you also need to do your homework. Our website, hktdc.com, is a great place to start. It offers updated market intelligence and opportunities in China and the rest of Asia. We also organize many trade exhibitions and conferences in Hong Kong. Many of them are the largest of their kind in the world. These are ideal platforms for you to understand the market, develop new contacts, and meet potential partners, suppliers, or even customers. Now, I encourage you to contact my office, tell us about your product and services, and then we can go from there. Okay, thank you, and stay safe.
Thank you, Winchell.
Yeah.
If you have any questions, put them in the chat. And Jeff, you're up. Jeff is from the Singapore Economic Development Board. Just want to say, I'm from Malaysia and actually lived and studied in Singapore. So he's from a place that's very close to my heart. Go ahead, Jeff.
Okay, can everyone see my screen? Oops.
Yes.
Oh no, it's a lot of technical errors here, but thank you, Winchell and Marina. Thank you, GAACC, for this kind invitation, as well as Tyler for your sponsorship of this event. I'd like to acknowledge, the partnership between Hong Kong and Singapore. There recently was a travel bubble announced between our two countries, so that we can allow for leisure travel to resume again. This is, I think, the first in the world in terms of leisure travel. It's something that both our nations have worked on very closely based on mutual trust and comfort of how we engage this virus of COVID-19. Just to give you a brief update, what we're going to see between this travel bubble is daily flights, approximately 200 passengers per plane. That's the maximum capacity. And in order for people to travel, they need to do a pre-departure and post-arrival COVID testing as they go about their. Sorry. Yes. Hello.
Sorry to interrupt you, Jeff. This is Marina, but we still cannot see your screen.
Yeah. We can only see
you cannot see my screen. Oh no. Give me a moment.
Now we can see you.
Oh, let me see. Start broadcast. Okay. Can you guys see my screen?
Now, yes.
Yes.
Now,
okay,
yes.
Perfect. It's all right. I didn't do anything in terms of the slides, so you didn't miss out anything so far. So I appreciate you guys keeping me aware of what's going on. So yeah, like I said, we're very happy that both our countries are working together. I hope that this can be some sort of platform or structure for more countries to pilot and test how we can resume tourism and travel again in the future. Now, so in 2018, there was a movie that came out called Crazy Rich Asians. It's really a love story about a young girl who met a young handsome man who happens to be from Singapore, from a really rich family, and they go about this journey on trying to find acceptance with his family. But I think what most people took away from the movie was all these cinematic views of Singapore. And what I wanted to say is, Singapore, some of it is true, some of it isn't. But Singapore really wasn't what it was depicted in the movie many years ago. So we share some commonalities with Hong Kong. We were a British colony. Most importantly, we were mostly a trading hub for the longest period of time. And what I wanted to share is that the British, when they were in Singapore, were the largest employers in the country. And it took some time for us to go from that British colony to what we are today, right? Which is so this two pictures that I just shared with you are the exact same locations of where our Marina Bay Sands downtown area is, right? You can see there's been quite a fair bit of progression over 50 years. So when the British pulled out of Singapore, what happened was that they left a huge hole in terms of employment. At that point in time, most of the Singaporeans are unskilled, and most of them were struggling to pick up their lives and find jobs after the British left. So that's when really my organization, the Singapore Economic Development Board, was formed. We were formed to help look at this problem of unemployment. And that's when we first started attracting new investments into Singapore. At that point in time, based on our talent profile, we were only able to look at labor-intensive industries. So most of the things that were being produced in Singapore were the likes of garments and hair wigs and things like that. But as we moved into the 70s and we grew our partnerships with the companies that were in Singapore, we focused a lot more on skills development. So we started sending out Singaporeans to go into different countries overseas for apprenticeship programs. And that's how we slowly try to develop the talent base that we had. In the 80s, that's when we started attracting capital intensive investments. So the likes of the first petrochemicals refinery was in Singapore, as well as semiconductors manufacturing. For semiconductors, some of you guys may be familiar with the company called Texas Instruments. That was one of our first investments in the semiconductors fields in Singapore. And it's very close to my heart because I had family members that were actually working in that factory as well. In the 90s, we looked at more technology focused industries. So the likes of chemicals and electronics. And at the same time in the 2000s, early 2000s, we looked at biomedical and aerospace industries. Now, when we move into the 21st century where we are today, we're starting to focus a lot more on a knowledge and innovation-based industry. And that's when a lot of R&D activities are coming into Singapore, not only from a private sector, but also from a public research sector as well. So Singapore today, most people would think about it as a tourism destination, and that's one of our main contributors, along with the financial services and infocom sectors. But what I like to share, which is why I went through the backstory, is that actually manufacturing is the key pillar of Singapore's economy, which contributes about 20% of our GDP. It is important for us to maintain our manufacturing because these are high value products. And not only that, they form the basis and foundation for the rest of the services in Singapore's economy to function. Our GDP today is about $500 billion Singapore dollars. And to put it into context, in terms of US dollars, it's about 3 times of Austin's GDP. But really, Singapore as an end market is not that interesting. And I think Winchell brought this up as well on Southeast Asia as a block. So if we take, for example, flying from Texas to New York, it's about a 3 or 4 hour flight, right? And that covers half of America. But if you travel from Singapore, as we can see in the map, A 3 or 4 hour flight gives you access to Southeast Asia, and that block is over 600 million people. And then if we want to extend that further out, let's say a cross-country flight from California to New York, right? That will bring you from Singapore to the whole Asia-Pac region. That brings you access to India, China, North Asia, and Australia. And that population size is 4.2 billion people, and that's more than half of the global population. Like Winchell shared earlier, the Southeast Asian economy is, I think our stats are a bit different from what I have. We are the 7th largest economic bloc. It's a $2.4 trillion economy, which has been expanding at 300% since 2001. Well, the interesting thing about this block, like Winchell mentioned, is that it is an area which is growing. We are seeing more investments come in into the areas of Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, and we're going to see a young population that are digital natives, that are very savvy in the internet environment, and a growing middle income class. This block is going to become the 4th largest economy in the next 10 years. And this presents a lot of opportunities for US companies to come into the Southeast Asian region to capture and be ahead of the game to capture this growing market. So I would like to end off with a bit about my organization and what we do and how we can help companies in their journey, right? So we are the Singapore Economic Development Board. We're the main economic agency in Singapore that leads investment promotion and industry development. And what does that mean, right? It means that we help people set up in Singapore. And for those companies that are already in Singapore, we work with them continuously to transform their activities. And lastly, we also work together with them to look into innovation and new growth areas. Our approach is to attract, transform, and create. So we attract new investment, we transform our existing base, and we create new businesses through innovation. And I'm going to share some examples with you about how we go about them. So when we talk about attract, I'm going to share with you 2 investments that were announced this year. And the interesting thing about them, because these are some investments that we never thought would be possible in Singapore. So firstly, Hyundai announced that it was going to build an EV plant in Singapore. Why this is interesting is because this is the first time in 40 years that Singapore will have automotive manufacturing in our country. Previously, when we looked at automotive manufacturing, Singapore was not a cost-effective location for them to do such kind of activities. However, with EVs is a different story, as well as advanced manufacturing technologies. We're able to lower the cost and as well as have different components come in for electric vehicles, which makes it more viable to do in Singapore. The second investment is by Just Eat, which is a Californian-based agriculture company. So what is interesting is Singapore only has 5% of our food supply sourced in country. We import over 95% of our food from overseas. And that's because we are a very small area and it's been very difficult to do agriculture activity. But with new alternative proteins and urban agriculture techniques, we're seeing new investments come in. And Just Eat is one of those investors. They're going to build a plant-based egg manufacturing facility in Singapore. I'm going to move on to how we look at transformation with our companies. So I'll touch on 2 areas. One is digitalization and the other is advanced manufacturing. So if we look at digitalization, I think there are 4 components that really that we feel are very important. Singapore is a global Asian tech hub. And that not only helps the vertical of the digital industry, but also across all the other industries as a horizontal capability. So first we look at talent. We work very closely with our education system to make sure that our universities and institutes of higher learning are producing the right talent that are industry ready to take on such jobs. Second is on the digital infrastructure. Singapore has over 50% of Southeast Asian data center capacity located in Singapore. That means we have over 30 different data centers from American companies, Singapore companies, Chinese companies, and companies all over the world that are based in Singapore. When we look at partnerships, EDB helps facilitate our companies that are in Singapore with our local ecosystem to look at innovation. So take, for example, we have Rolls-Royce partnering with one of our local universities, the Nanyang Technological University, in a corporate lab that looks at innovation. And lastly, when we talk about digital services, we have over 80 of the top 100 technology companies that are based in Singapore, and they are able to provide digital products and services for the rest of the other industries that are working there. Next, I would like to touch on advanced manufacturing. I think this is something that we look at very closely to make sure that Singapore is a competitive location and a viable location for companies to operate in. So first is on the R&D front. Singapore has 2 model factories with one of our other government agency partners that looks at developing and demonstrating advanced manufacturing models. So in these model factories, not only can you see how a modern shop floor is being run, which is a showcase really for how operations can look like, but companies can work in these model factories to test bed some solutions that they would like to implement on their shop floor. By doing so, this will help them work out the bugs that they have and not impact the use and downtimes in their operations. And then when they finally worked out the viable model, they're able to implement that into their manufacturing line. Second is the Smart Industry Readiness Index. This is something that was incepted by my organization, EDB, along with a standards organization, TUSU. So we announced this index 2 years ago. It's really, to put it very bluntly, it's like a health checkup. It helps companies do a self-assessment to help you understand whether your operations, where your operations are at in its digital journey. So it helps you understand where you are in your supply chain operations, if your shop floor equipment are digitally connected to each other, do you have the right digital infrastructure, and are your talents well trained? Really, this is a diagnostic tool to help you know where you are so that you can know what areas you can work on in your journey to be more digitalized. The third part is bridging the global advanced manufacturing solutions community with the manufacturing community in Asia Pacific. And that is the Industrial Transformation Asia Pacific event. We have had this event since 2018, and the last 2 events had more than 10,000 people participate. Really, this is a chance for manufacturers to see what are the solutions out there, and for innovative companies in advanced manufacturing to be able to showcase and share how they can help manufacturers move along that journey. And the last portion is really looking at our workforce. We work very closely with our workforce development agencies to come out with a guideline for the various skills needed for different roles that are out there. This is not the 10 commandments, but this is a guideline so that people can understand, if they want to take the next step to a new role, what are the skills they need to develop either on the job or out in the classroom for them to take on a new role. So lastly, I know we want to leave more time for Q&A, so I just want to talk about our corporate venturing department. So these are some of the announcements we have made with some of our partners, Schneider Electric and NG. I'll focus more on NG. It was a corporate venturing team program that was launched between NG and Singapore. NG is a energy and power solutions company from France. And what they're doing in Singapore is venturing into building sustainable startups and looking at clean tech and clean energy, which is something that is a priority, not only for our nation, but globally, as we see global warming and carbon emissions be more of a problem. So this is one of the areas that we work with our companies to help them look into new business areas and work with the local ecosystem. Before I end, I want to share with you what resources you can find on EDB's website. So if you look at the EDB website, you're able to download some guides on setting up your business and hiring people in Singapore. Not only that, we have a concierge page, which helps actually link you up with some of the partners that we have already curated for businesses entering Singapore. So you're able to find legal services, accounting services, recruitment services, and even co-working spaces as a first guide here on the concierge page. We also have an events calendar that allows you to see what are upcoming industry and trade events that are happening in Singapore to get you well connected with the community and find business opportunities. And lastly, we have a setup cost calculator, which helps new businesses estimate the sort of costs needed, to set up and run your business in Singapore. So with that, thank you so much, and please do keep in touch with us. You can find us on social media platforms like Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. And you can follow our EDB website as well to look for our latest updates. Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Jeff. So we've got a good amount of time, and I'm hoping that to have a quick conversation, we can have a conversation even among ourselves. Tyler, you spent some time in Asia, so you might have some questions for our panelists. And then everybody else, like Ishan said, there's a Q&A box. Put your questions there, I'll read them out.
Sure.
Tyler.
Yeah. So I spent a lot of time in Singapore and a lot of time in Hong Kong. Part of my background was supporting multinationals that were doing business across Asia and inside of China. So I'm familiar with a lot of the names, Jeff, that you put on the screen there. And it's great. Singapore has a ton of ecosystem and government-friendly resources to use and economic-friendly resources to use, which is wonderful. I guess my question would be centered around like the startup stuff. I know you touched a little bit on startups and that ecosystem. Maybe you can comment a little bit, and Winchell, you too, for Hong Kong. I spent some time with Invest Hong Kong before, so I'm familiar with some of the things that are available. Maybe if you can touch a little bit on what's available for startups in terms of maybe investment, or what's the appetite, or is that increasing, decreasing? Anything related to technology startups would be quite interesting to hear about if you have any comments on that.
Sure. So the startup scene in Singapore is actually quite active. I think we have quite a fair bit of interesting unicorns that have come out of the Singapore system. So the likes of Grab, which is similar to Uber, that's based in Singapore. We also have a sports entertainment company called One Championship. They are very similar to UFC. They're over $1 billion size company, really showcasing mixed martial arts. I want to make sure I get the right words out. So they're focusing more on mixed martial arts as part of their entertainment portfolio. And most of the events are held in Singapore. In terms of the VC setup, we have quite a fair bit of incubators and accelerators that are from overseas, as well as locally based accelerators and incubators. So the likes of Sequoia, 500 startups, those are more from the US. And then of course in Singapore we have more government linked and university linked startups that are there. One of them is called Block 71. Interesting story about that accelerator program. They are linked to our National University of Singapore, but they also have satellite campuses globally. So they have a campus in San Francisco where startups can actually, from Singapore, go and try to plant themselves in the Bay Area, and the same way the other way around. So if someone goes into our campus in Block 71 in San Francisco and they want to enter the Asian market, they can come over and they can use the facilities in Singapore. not only that, they have campuses in China and Indonesia as well. So it's quite an interesting program they have in Block 71. And if anyone is interested, feel free to reach out to me. I'm able to link you up with our partners in that area. Yeah.
Like Singapore, the Hong Kong startup ecosystem is growing rapidly, partly because of the growing appetite of Chinese investors, in startups, and also, besides the Hong Kong government roll out a lot of incentive to really nurture the Hong Kong local startups. My organization, the Trade Council, also roll out a lot of incentive and platform in Hong Kong to attract overseas startup, especially from the US and from Europe, Southeast Asia, to go to Hong Kong, and then we design program for them to meet with local startups, to see what they can do together. And in fact, every time I went to Austin, I had meeting with Capital Factories and others. So the ecosystem is growing. In fact, one of our startup, they were one of the first unicorn from Hong Kong called Lala Move. They just started their service both in Dallas and Houston. Is like an Uber, but instead of transporting people, the company transport packages. So they have an app very similar to Uber app. So you can just exactly the same as Uber. So you can check that out. That's a Hong Kong startup.
Thanks, Winchell. I know when we planned a delegation to Asia in 2019, we were in Hong Kong. We actually visited Cyberport and checked out the incubator there. We do have a question from Regina. This is more for you, Winchell. She's asking about the political, I think she meant the protests, and how that's impacting the economy and then maybe the future of trade. Do you want to address
Sure.
this?
I mean, it's unfortunate that we had a large scale protest started in June. In fact, I was there. I was in Hong Kong, and I was right in the middle of where Wan Chai is. That's where the action was there. I was there, and unfortunate that some of that protest turned into a very violent protest. And so it lasted for quite a long time. It lasted almost a year, and of course that really affects, even besides COVID, that in itself really affects our businesses and people's daily life. And on top of that, now we have the U.S. China conflict, which Hong Kong was kind of stuck in the middle. Of course, being part of China, we were also affected in a negative way. As I mentioned earlier, our economy really relies on free trade. We are a trading economy, and any disruption or restriction on trade, especially with our major trading partner like the US or the EU, really affects us, the Hong Kong company, as well as US company doing business in the region. Okay. But we are starting to see business activities in Hong Kong picking up. For example, one of the hardest hit area is our hospitality tourism sector. And Jeff talked about the travel bubble between Hong Kong and Singapore, and we are very glad that we have this arrangement. I think this is just a start, and I think both Hong Kong and Singapore will continue to seek travel bubbles with other countries. And I think this is a very good beginning to restart, the whole tourism industry. And I think businesses are very agile. They'll find way, under difficult circumstances to really survive and find ways to really, survive in this difficult period.
Hey, Jeff, Winchell mentioned the U.S.-China trade conflict. What did Singapore see, activity from that? Because we heard that businesses were moving out of China and then into Vietnam, for example. But did you see things happening in Singapore?
Yeah, so to answer that question, I think, if we go a bit further back, before even the US-China trade tensions, I think there's one thing we need to recognize is that China is actually not as cheap as it used to be. So there were people that are already looking at viable options to find lower cost manufacturing locations. And that was, what happened in Vietnam, what happened in Thailand, Malaysia and Indonesia. So we are seeing some of that trends move down. Did the US-China tensions accelerate some of it? It's hard to tell really what the delta is, to be perfectly honest, but we already noticed that there was that movement already, right? So if we talk about Singapore, yes, we did see more interest, and I would say, I think it's a general kind of interest that anyone would be asking if they are looking to move out of China. That I assume that they weren't just looking at Singapore, they were also looking at Malaysia and Indonesia as well, because the uncertainty really had many companies wondering where they could operate. So we did feel a lot of interest. To say that all of them come to Singapore, I wouldn't say that's the case. A lot of companies are still in that wait and see mode as well because of the US elections that just happened, right? There's a lot more uncertainty that there will be more changes. So to be perfectly fair, I think business activity was, there were a lot of interest, but business activity was actually more normal than people thought it would be, right? But I want to add on to the point of Winchell and the relationship that Singapore and Hong Kong has. I think one of the reasons why we're able to have this travel bubble as well is because of how our countries manage the COVID situation. I do apologize, I didn't update about that earlier in my presentation. But Singapore, what we are seeing right now is almost 0 community cases daily. We only see mostly imported cases from people traveling into Singapore. And we see very low cases in the partnering countries that we have green lanes, business travel green lanes, as well as the leisure travel tourism bubble with Hong Kong. So I think this is something that maybe is a bit different in Asia because the cases there, I think the management of the countries are a bit different. And we see that cases are a bit lower. So we are actually expecting business activity to pick up a bit more in the region in terms of recovery compared to Europe and the US. And we hope to see companies take advantage of that as well, because you can really be ahead of the game if you're in that region. Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting when COVID kind of happened, there was talk about the weather being a factor. And we're sort of seeing that now with it getting cold and cases rising in the US, and of course in Singapore it's just nice and warm and humid all the time, so
Yeah,
so you don't have that factor.
Yeah, I thought that was very interesting because coming from Singapore and it being hot and humid all the time, the advice that was being shared in the US about the weather changing the impacts of the virus did not really seem to match what we understood, because we were going through summer all the time. So
Yeah.
if the virus was there, I didn't think it would change. But we are hoping that with the vaccines coming out, more and more business activity can resume.
Yeah, super.
I have another question. Yeah. So I can't remember, Winchell, maybe you mentioned the new trade agreement that was signed over the weekend. Maybe you guys can touch a little bit more on that. I mean, obviously the US is not included in that. India was not included in that. Do you believe it's impactful for GDPs across all of Asia? Do you think that the US being excluded from that will impact anything or hurt businesses in the US coming across? What is your view and thought on the trade pact?
I don't know. I really can't comment on about US, and who knows. I mean, as to how the new administration will impact business in the region, or maybe President-elect will rejoin or will reconsider TPP, or join the RCEP. That's really anybody's guess at this point. But I think for us now, even Hong Kong is not a member of this regional this RCEP. I just signed in Vietnam a couple of days ago. Just by the increasing activities between these 15 countries will benefit Hong Kong. And when you look at the development in China in the last 1 or 2 quarters, China will likely be the only country that will register a growth this year. So they pretty much lead the recovery. And just by doing that, I think they will somehow, I believe, will benefit the whole region. But of course, this is so new. Really, I mean, only time will tell. Maybe I can give you a better assessment, in the next few months.
Yeah, to follow on from Winchell, I think in terms of the activity in Asia, I think we have to be realistic and recognize that this trade partnership really is quite a big block of nations. So the access to these markets are huge. So I think that's one thing we have to acknowledge is even, so I think that's one thing maybe from a US standpoint, there will be some disadvantages not participating in the trade agreement simply because the market access is huge, right? However, that being said, from a Singapore standpoint, we have free trade agreements with the US as well. So there are possibilities to work through different countries, right? Which the US has free trade agreements with, and then try to sell their goods across that market. How things will change in the future, like Winchell said, I think with the new administration coming into place, it's very hard to tell. I think we at the Economic Development Board have been working very closely and trying to understand our companies, what they see and what they think might happen with the election in place. And everyone has said the same thing with me. If they had a crystal ball and they knew it, they wouldn't be struggling the way they were, and they would be able to give me better answers. But I think the reality is, that there is a region that's growing a bit faster there, and I think behind the Asia Pacific region, we also see the likes of Africa and South America coming up. But I think the COVID crisis really helps us understand a bit more of their challenges before those regions can catch up at that same growth rate. If we look at South America, the way the disease has spread, really we can see some challenges across the countries and their administrations. So in terms of the next 10 years or so, likelihood, the Asia Pacific bloc will be the one of the fastest growing economies, and I think that's something that people should want to take advantage of, right, with the opportunities there. And then eventually, if we see there are changes in South America and Africa, I think those blocks will catch up very quickly as well.
Speaking of Africa and South America, Winchell, you want to give us a quick update on Belt and Road? I think the last time we had you, you were talking about that initiative.
Well, I don't have any very updated information about the Belt and Road because I think the whole region are really preoccupied by COVID, and that hasn't been a lot of new development in the Belt and Road. But I think I think in the long run, the Belt and Road, but of course it's also turned to, also became a geopolitical issues in some part of the world. But nevertheless, Hong Kong has been benefited by the initiative. In fact, we still hold our Belt and Road Summit every year, and we have participants from over Asia and Europe. So I think hopefully is moving to the right directions.
Super, thank you. We have time for one more question, which comes from Regina again, and this is for Jeff. She thanks you for mentioning NG. She's not familiar with it. Is its focus entirely on energy, or does it extend to other areas of sustainability, including human and animal rights?
So a bit of background on NG. I do have to admit that probably my sharing will be quite limited on the company. They are a French power utilities company. So really their focus is a lot more on clean energy, as the focus on moving to renewables and things like that take place not only in Europe but in Asia as well. So for them, they are trying to manage the energy transition, try to move away from fossil fuels. And I think in terms of the different regions, there was a Netflix show which featured Zac Efron, and he went to Iceland, and there's geothermal energy in that area, right? But we have to acknowledge that you can't have geothermal energy everywhere, right? So you need to find scalable, sustainable solutions in terms of clean energy for all kinds of situations. And we think the struggle also comes in urban environments where there's a lot of built up area, and we need to find interesting ways to implement such solutions. So NG is really a power utilities company, and they are trying to help manage the transition from fossil fuels to clean energy. And obviously their challenge is not just finding geothermal energy, right? It's finding for urban solutions and things like that. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. So before I close out the event, I would just like to thank all of our speakers today. Thank you, Winchell and Jeff, and also Tyler too. It was a really, really wonderful insight and also briefing. So I hope that y'all enjoyed today's event. I will also send out a follow-up email with a webinar survey, and also I will attach a copy of Jeff's presentation. One more reminder, we do have 2 upcoming events in December. So it's 2 final events. So make sure that you RSVP through our website. So we do have a annual holiday social, Sayonara 2020 on December.
Sayonara to me too, so y'all should need to show up, otherwise I'll be sad.
Yes. So make sure that you RSVP through our website, and it's free for our members. If you're not a member, we'll charge you a little bit fee, but you will have a membership through 2021. So thank you guys, and I hope that you all have a great afternoon.
Happy Thanksgiving, stay safe.
Stay safe.
Happy Thanksgiving. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank
See
you.